Now, your idea of a sex inventory and my idea of a sex inventory is going to be very different, I can assure you, because what this is based on is based out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The same 4-step. When we go through it the big book awakening way, we do our inventory, just our regular resentment inventory. These are all the resentments that we carry that kind of just like give us a feeling about things. And then we do the fear grid, which is really getting down to the bottom of every single fear and understanding like what's at the bottom of it. And it's typically that our self-reliance has failed us. And then we do the sex inventory where we take a look at and kind of do like an autopsy on previous relationships and if there is a pattern there and perhaps where our intentions hadn't been so pure. And then we do a sex ideal, which is where we write how we wish to show up in relationships. This is not a list of things that we want people to have in order for us to have sex with them, but rather who do we want to show up as what we identify as in relationships, and how do we want to feel in relationships? How do we want to act and treat our partner? How do we want to be treated and acted by our partner? These are not necessarily, you know, again, like must be 6'2" and into books or something like that, you know? So I wanted to go through the actual like part about what the big book talks about for sex though, because I get like a lot of weird questions about this actually. Like people tend to feel that in the big book you're supposed to wait a year for sobriety to start dating. That's not actually anywhere in the big book. That's just something that sponsors make up to control their sponsees or something. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It clearly addicts and alcoholics have a really beautiful way of transitioning their addictions from their primary addiction to anything else that they can get addicted to. As I have previously said, I have gotten addicted to doing the steps. I have done the steps alcoholically. Like, we need to understand it's not drugs or alcohol that are the problem. It's everything underneath it that we're trying to run away from and that we distance ourselves with by these distracting behaviors, many which end up very destructive. And sex can be another one. I have seen it over and over again. Like now it's kind of hilarious, but also tragically sad, because it does take a lot of people out. A lot of people out, meaning that a lot of people relapse over sex or love. And then sometimes even so they relapse or they kill themselves. And that's because going back to like previous references that I've made, a lot of people tend to rely and put so much emphasis on external circumstances and external validation in order to prove or determine their own worthiness, whereas the answer is always going to lie in self-validation and self-honoring and self-love, and that gets manifested through a series of work that you need to do on yourselves that I had to do on myself in order to feel more in touch with that and to come from a place of genuinely feeling like, you know, and that comes a lot from this connection that I have with my higher power. That isn't so easily like shaken. Like if someone's mean to me, I'm like, oh, that's a bummer. I hope they have a better day. If someone is like, you know, people think that I like it. I think people are like, oh, like maybe I just don't care about things. It's not that I don't care. It's that I also understand that like other people are not the determining factor in my life. Like other people are not necessarily a reflection of my own value. I have a lot of amazing people in my life. And I do think that we tend to attracts like. But I'm not going to base my entire worthiness or decisions or fears based off of what is going on around me externally, because that's never actually proven to be a really accurate reflection of who I am. So that said, we tend to use people, but I'm not saying that I never have. So all that said, now that's coming from a Vanessa in 2024 who has done a tremendous amount of work and therapy too. I've done therapy and step work and had profound spiritual experiences that have gotten me to this place. Was not always like that. I can assure you, and I'm sure we can call up a couple of exes and have them confirm. But the reality, so sorry, everything is so loud over here right now. My chair, there's somebody literally drilling at like 9:30 at night right now outside. In fact, I spent a considerable amount of my life bending over backwards to try to accommodate other people's perceptions of me. Am I coming off nice enough? Am I pleasing enough to this person? Like, oh, I don't want to make this person mad. Oh, I don't want to hurt that person's feelings. Oh, I don't want to do this. Oh, I don't want to do that. All that did was keep me at a distance from people. Conflict is a very important part of intimacy. And when people are unwilling to confront communication issues or even like hurt feelings or something within their relationships, it could be within even coworkers or with parents or siblings or friends or partners, clearly. Like there means that there's this disconnect, and I've never understood. People will be like, oh, I can't believe this person so and so did this and did that. And I'm like, did you ask them about it? Like, you know, it doesn't even have to come from a place of like defensiveness. It has to come from a place of curiosity. Like, why did you say that? Or like, hey, when you did this thing, is this what you meant to say? Or did you mean this? Because it kind of hurt my feelings. And it's not like a cool place to come from sometimes. And I don't feel cool a lot of times asking for the clarifications, especially if it ends up hurting my feelings. Like, but I would rather have my feelings hurt than than live in this like shadowy, weird, like unknowingness, you know. I don't do well with I mean, my personality type is all or nothing, black and white. Like I need definitive answers as much as possible. And so like in this vagueness and this opaqueness, like I don't, unless it's like God stuff, I'm not really into it in my relationships. It doesn't suit me well spiritually, because to me it reflects a lack of authenticity, a lack of trust, and a lack of vulnerability. And in order for me to feel close to people and really share myself with them, there needs to be those things in relationships. And a very wise woman once told me that like using people is still using. And so while I've seen people be sober, they've often resorted to relationships, one-sided ones, codependent relationships, just sex relationships, or just weird. I've even engaged in like these weird, like emotional relationships. And it's all an attempt, it's all just a way to distract oneself from oneself. Because all that I was doing during that time, and I would like have crushes on people all the time, and I would just flirt with guys all the time and just be like, oh, do they like me? Do they like me? I wonder if they like me. He did this and this. And I loved the whole like analyzing a text conversation, you know. A period of my life, I was screenshotting our conversation, sending it to the group chat, and we would take it apart and see, like, what do you think you meant by that? Like, what do you think, you know? And it's just like, that was so that I didn't have to deal with my feelings of depression. That was so that I didn't have to deal with, oh, cool. I hit my steps today. That was so that I didn't have to focus on my complete lack of purpose and meaning in life. That was so that I didn't have to focus on my dead-end job that I hated and was trying to escape from, and like, you know, all this other stuff. It was just much easier to focus on a semi-okay looking person who paid attention to me, and then like putting all this, putting them on a pedestal and putting all these expectations on them that they did not ask for. nor did I even express. And then just for me to become resentful about it later, or somehow like get an ego about it and be like, oh, I'm not talking to that guy anymore. Like, oh, that person gave me the ick or whatever. It just totally cutting people out, right? And so, uh, and then they're just being like, oh, I thought we were just friends or something, you know. And like, poor guys. I love men to this day so much, just because of, one, I think God has really changed my heart for men. Um, I I know that it's really popular to just bash on dudes, and there's a lot of room for improvement, right? I also am aware of these societal standards that men grow up with, and these depictions of what a man should be. And, you know, I feel for them. Because there's almost this like pressure that you're supposed to be a specific way, very much like how women are pressured to be a very specific way, right? But at least like we got to hang out in the back seat. Like the pressure wasn't on women um to be a specific way, because the generations ahead of us were, you know. It's more of, for us, like this kind of squirming out of more of an oppressive state, to kind of reclaim some of the power that we inherently have, because we are, again, divinely created in the image of God, just like men are. So all of that to say that this idea has always stuck with me about, especially when dealing with the sex that you're attracted to, um, about how we still in sobriety can be using people, and that is still a way of using. Because if you think about, you know, the rush, the chemicals, the oxytocin, the dopamine, the serotonin that you get from either the chase of like chasing somebody that you know is not emotionally available, that you know is not a compatible fit for you, um, but you still like that like hot, cold, push, pull dynamic, running and chasing dynamic. That's still a high, that's still that adrenaline, that's still that cortisol that's really raising in your system, in your body, that you can get hooked on, right? Um, and I know that that has been my experience in the past as well. And it's weird because I think that like something that really clarifies this for me sometimes, it's like, do I actually like this person? Like I remember the question being asked to me once, like, you know, you're so caught up in this person. Have you ever stopped to, and whether they like you or not, like, have you ever stopped to consider whether you like them? And that has just like completely crushed my idealized fantasies of like relationships with people. Cause I'm like, I actually don't like this person. I'm just here for the attention. I'm just here for the affection. I'm just here for this dynamic that I'm playing into, which distracts me from the real pain that I'm feeling within myself of not being worthy enough, not being lovable, not being this or that or whatever, right? And one way that I came to understand a lot of this was through this sex inventory tool that we do in Big Book Awakening. And I'll just read you some of these questions, just so that you can think about some of these things for yourself. Oops, I accidentally made this way too big. Okay. So, for example, one of the questions on here is, you know, and if you, I'll put the link for this sheet in case you do want to try this without the other steps, I guess. But it's, you know, a sex inventory worksheet. So God, please help me, excuse me. God, please help me see the truth about my conduct in relationships. It's really important. Again, I just have to emphasize, I think I said it a little bit in the last video, that when we're doing inventory, when we're doing resentments, it's important that we not get too caught up in the morbid reflection of things. Like, I should have done better. I could have done that. Could have done this sooner. I could have done this differently. I could have done blah, 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 blah. And it's like, it's helpful that you see and you can recognize this, right? Like, but the reality is, I think that there's still a delusion there that if you had been capable of doing something differently, you would have. But the reality is that you didn't. I didn't. For a lot of these relationships, looking back on it, like if you were to plop me back into the current present me, into those relationships now, those things would not have happened. There's just no way. There's so much more that I understand about myself and about relationships, about this world, than I knew back then. I did not know that the impact that I would have on some people, or that those relationships would have on me, that I'd have to like unravel and entangle for the next decade, would be that powerful, and that I could not foresee it at that time. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and so you act as if you do, and there is no way for you to know, let alone have acted differently. So I feel like I just need to say I'm not going to tolerate any conversations about you guys being like, oh, I should have done this differently. I did this and this, and I shouldn't have gotten involved. And it's like, yeah, clearly we know that now. We know that now from a healed place. But when you're in the middle of it, even if you had a feeling of it, there wasn't any way to break from a pattern. An example of this, well, I'll go through, I kind of want to do one on one more by really toxic relationship. I don't know. Let me think if I can gather up the courage to do that. So, here on the sheets, it asks, write a brief history of the relationship. And we do this through a series of 4 questions. The first one is, my motives for getting involved were ... So I can do, I'll do an example one. I don't think I've ever read a sex inventory sheet before. Oh my God, there was this one time I was asked to speak on sex inventory at a meeting, and I took my little sheets and I was going to read one at the podium and then like make it part of my speaking thing. The sheet that I had taken to read, the guy was in the crowd. He's in the audience. I had to scrap that completely. And he knew some of the examples were so specific. I was like, oh, I can't read this. I was so caught off guard. I was like, okay, this is not being, I had to like buzz through the rest of those 20 minutes. Okay, anyhow. So kind of really understanding and putting pen to paper about the history of the relationship. So one of the questions is, my motives for getting involved were ... My specific conduct in the relationship has been ... Major points that came up in the relationship are ... How it ended or how it is now. So think about that. Think about that with somebody who you're maybe resentful at. Maybe it's like, oh, that girl didn't call you back. Oh, that guy didn't call you back. Let's sit down, whip out one of these sexy sheets and really look at, okay, well, what was your motive for getting involved in this anyway? And how did you act in this relationship? What did you specifically do? What were some major points that came up in the relationship? What were some things that you guys frequently discussed that were a point of conflict? And then how did it end, or how is it currently at this point? So important questions to ask oneself. And then we turn it over. These are 2-sided sheets. And we ask ourselves some more information. So always asking with a prayer for kindness and compassion, for God to please help us see the truth, capital T, about our conduct in relationships. And so you put the name of the person and then the relationship to you. It's important to note that even though it's a sex inventory, it's not always people who you've had sex with. It is sometimes also people who you just had emotional relationships with. Maybe it was a coworker who you knew was married, or it was your roommates, or it was, I don't know, your cousin's wife or something. I don't know. Maybe there's just, or it was, I've even done sex inventories on family members. The reason for that being that some of my relationships with family members has impacted how I show up as a woman. And so it's like, being able to look at these relationships in a different way, I'm like, oh, I see that the way that I kind of like overperform or seek validation from my dad, or the way that I push away the people like my dad, is also now reflecting and showing up in other relationships, right? So these things can be pretty eye-opening. So I say all that just to say again that, like, how do we show up as like the daughter if people, or the sister, right? Can all be another way to do a sex inventory sheet. Um, because it doesn't always necessarily have to be based off of people we have sex with. Um, so, and for people, for people who are like, oh my God, I have to print out like 100 sheets or something. I think probably one of the most like eye-opening things for me during this is like how many of the same people we actually date or get involved with. I've often found that we can group people together. This happens a lot more frequently, I'm seeing, with like my sponsees being on like dating apps. So it's like, oh, it's another dating app person. All these people think they almost fit this template and have like the same like rise and fall. So it's like being able to put all these people on one sheet and be like, oh, I acted the same with all of these people. And it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So grouping people is sometimes a thing. And really just, I think even just being conscious of the fact that we tend to, until we're kind of wake up to this, date or be involved with the same type of person over and over again, because we ourselves have not done the work to change and attract somebody differently. So, much like we do on the regular inventories, our resentments, we turn the page over and look at our part, right? So, and this is a 9-question reflection on our conduct in this relationship. So where had I been selfish? Where had I been dishonest? Where had I been inconsiderate? Whom did I hurt? Looking around the relationship. Did I arouse jealousy? Did I arouse suspicion? Did I arouse bitterness? Where was I at fault? What should I have done instead? And in the relationship, don't write not gotten involved in the first place. Make sure you are especially explicit with number 9, and then refer back to this for the sex ideal. And then, of course, the harm, right? Any specific harm that comes to you while writing, considering, again, people involved around the relationship. So I will do this one. I'll do this one on an ex, for example. I am going to, hold on a sec, so sorry. Okay, sorry about that. I will do this on an ex. We will call him Mark. It's not his real name, but for the sake of this, just in case he sees this, because I don't think he will. But all right. So my motives for getting involved were, it was actually I met him on a dating app. I was bored. He was cute. I wanted his attention. I wanted to be in a relationship. And this was back in like 2012, 2013. And I had just kind of moved out on my own and kind of wanted to hit the dating scene, and felt like he would be a good distraction. My specific conduct in the relationship has been, so during that time, I was extremely volatile. I was drinking a lot. I already had 2 DUIs. I also was non-committal. Even though I said I wanted to be in a relationship, I was still flirting with other men. I was super verbally abusive towards this guy, like very verbally abusive. I was using his past against him. I just said some of the most vicious things that you could say to the guy. The major points that came up in the relationship are he ended up relapsing on heroin and meth. My drinking escalated and got very bad. It got even worse. I was extremely depressed, extremely volatile, not mentally well. I was really paranoid. I was constantly accusing him of cheating. I would stalk him. He would stalk me. It was very codependent. I would try to interfere in his relationship with his parents. His parents hated me. We were justified in doing so. I was really degrading to him as far as like, because he didn't have like a lot of money or anything like that. And so I would kind of put him down for that. Um, I would make myself a victim, even though I had perpetuated a lot of the arguments and fights that we had gotten into. That's just some of it. The major points that came up in the relationship are my drinking, his addiction, my disrespect for his recovery. When we met, he was trying to be sober. And I was like making him drink with me and smoke weed with me. I was putting him in really, he was on probation, it turns out. I found out while we were dating, and I put him in really unsafe for his freedom situations, including calling the police during our fights. Again, disrespecting his family and his relationship to them. And also him never having any money or not having stable work. And yeah, how it ended, I ended up going to jail and finally getting some like separation from that toxic cycle of like that push and pull, chase and run. I finally got some freedom from that. I think we each had protective orders against each other as well too. So we had no contact for, I want to say like 5 years after that. And I mean, when that expired, it's not like we were trying to, there was some contact during that time. Once on accident for me, and another time he called me, or he was definitely trying to reach out to me for something, and I don't really remember what. But then I did end up asking if I could make amends to him, which he immediately rejected, and then he let me make amends via email. And that's kind of where that's at. Something else about the sex inventory. I'm gonna read it from the big book in a second. I'll read it. When I read it, I'll tell you. So then, where had I been selfish? Oh, I completely disregarded anything for this man. This man was there just for my pleasure, for my entertainment, for my distraction. Like I was completely selfish through and through. I completely was just, I like mocked his sobriety. It was very abusive. I also knew that he would go like above and beyond if I asked for stuff for him. Like he would try to make it happen, and I just was I took advantage of that through and through. Where had I been dishonest? I mean, where hadn't I been? I was I was dishonest about wanting to be in a committed relationship. I was dishonest about liking him or even really having a lot of respect for him. And this isn't because he wasn't a respectful person. It was just I didn't have any respect for myself. I didn't really care much for his parents. Um, I was actually kind of like intimidated by his family because they were just like a very normal-ish family in like San Diego, and like they're two nurses, and and they lived in a beautiful home, and I felt kind of like beneath him, honestly. Yeah, so where had I been inconsiderate? for his sobriety. He had racked up some charges due to his addiction. When he met me, he was newly sober and trying to stay sober. I continued to drink around him. I was just really disrespectful of that and didn't consider any of the boundaries that he tried to set with me, even regarding his time when he did try to have a job and when he did try to work, when he was with family, when he was with friends. I was completely disrespectful of any boundaries that he'd set. Who had I hurt? Look around the relationship. Well, clearly him, his coworkers who got dragged into our fights, sometimes my coworkers who had to hear me complaining about him all of the time, my friends who got sick of hearing about him, my family who never knew if they were going to have to pick me up from jail, or if there was if I was showing up with bruises, or just like horrible fights that we would get in, and how we involved our parents is so embarrassing. Um, his family, clearly, his friends who we would hang out with, it was just embarrassing. Did I arouse jealousy? Yes, there were definitely people who I had like hooked up with in the past who I would kind of like throw in his face and who I still had like access to. And I would use that to make him feel insecure, or to try to make him feel insecure, to try to remind him that like he wasn't shit, basically. It was extremely, jealous also because my relationship with my parents was different than his relationship with his. And, he told me previously that he really liked the relationship that I had with my parents at the time. And so I kind of used that a little bit. Did I arouse suspicion? Oh, jealousy. Oh yeah, suspicion. And the difference between jealousy and suspicion: jealousy is making people think that they might lose you because of something or somebody else. Suspicion is a lack of trust, any lies, anything that I wasn't completely honest about. Did I arouse suspicion? Yeah, I mean, I wasn't an honest person. I lied to him all the time about stuff. Even just the more blanketed general thing that like I wasn't honest with him about what I wanted in a relationship. Like I was telling him that I want a long-term relationship and like all this, but the reality was like I didn't even know what I was doing with myself, and that was a very overwhelming idea. Did I arouse bitterness? Yeah, he was constantly, I mean, I think he's still bitter, unfortunately. There was a lot of anger. He was very angry at me all the time, because of because of my actions, right? Where was I at fault? I was really immature. I was emotionally unavailable. I presented as if I wanted to be in a long-term relationship. I demeaned him and made him feel less than, just for having struggles like any person does. I belittled him. I was emotionally and financially abusive. I didn't respect his boundaries. I wasn't trustworthy. What should I have done instead? And remember, you can't write not gotten involved in the first place. What should I have done instead was, what should I have done instead? Was one, leave when it became abusive. But if I'm really to look at that relationship, if I had wanted it to work out, if it was meant to work out, I would have stopped drinking. I would have been respectful towards him and his family and worked to improve my own self-esteem so that I didn't project my insecurities and my sense of unworthiness onto him. And yeah, because I feel like, you know, daughters really do sometimes end up dating their fathers. And this was somebody who was really enabling of my alcoholism, was extremely codependent, who, when I asked him to jump, he would say, ask how high, he was just somebody who would really go above and beyond to meet any the most ridiculous demands that I had made. And and I did that just as my own power trip. Oh, just to feel some sense of control, with complete lack of respect to him. Like, he didn't deserve any of that. I don't care if he wasn't like a good match for me. Like, he's a human being who did not deserve to be treated that way. And I should have really reflected on why I felt so angry at him all the time, on why I felt so unworthy, why I felt like such low self-esteem. I should have really looked at my part. I should have really admitted my own faults. I should have been more honest about my intentions with the relationship. I should have communicated a lot better than I did versus just like shutting him down, doing the silent treatment, etc. And then any specific harms, I hurt him, I hurt his family, I hurt my coworkers and his friends. So that is just one example. And it's funny because in the big book, they are really, this was a book written again, like in the late 30s, early 40s, bunch of very conservative white dudes, and the way that they approach sex is like very funny. I'll just read a little bit to you, and it is perfectly on page 69. And it's such a funny thing, like everybody gets kind of like squirmy about sex, and people can be like, it's something to like giggle about, or just like, but the reality is that people die over this. This thing that we can laugh about and like gossip about and kind of like make it this fun thing also has the power to completely crush people's sense of like worthiness and stability and identity and their ego. So while I try to make it as fun and lighthearted as I can, it is a really serious thing, because so many different parts of ourselves get involved in this. So they talk about, okay, so now about sex. So many of us needed an overhauling there. Above all, we needed to be sensible on this question. It is so easy to get off the track. Here we find human opinions running to the extremes. Absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we don't have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on the straight pepper diet, which is kind of spicy. We want to stay out of this controversy. AA is saying right here, right now, they don't want anything. They're not going to have an opinion on how you should run your sex life. They're just going to tell you what they've seen happen, right? We don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. So that means we're not going to tell you what to do, what you can't do. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. So what can we do about them? So all they're going to tell you is how to approach your sex problems here. So when we reviewed our own conduct over the years, we reviewed our own conduct over the past years. So where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? That's the worksheet we just did. Whom did we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. It's important to say also that these are the things that we intentionally did in the moment, right? There are some times that we will unintentionally arouse suspicion or jealousy, and like some things like that, that's on the other person, right? These are just things that we know we can be honest with ourselves about our conduct. It requires a tremendous amount of honesty, right? Because in this relationship that I was in, I would have told you, oh, I'm the best girlfriend. I am always calling and checking on him. I send his mom nice emails. I try to, I pay for food when we go out, or like do whatever, right? Like that's like, I would come off as a very caring and loving girlfriend, but behind the scenes, if I really looked at my intentions, at my motives, at my conduct in this relationship, we would find a completely different monster there. So again, this does require a tremendous amount of honesty with oneself. In this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. Oh, where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got it all down on paper and looked at it. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be disposed and loathed. I find this really interesting because if anybody is familiar with Kundalini yoga, like a big part of the power that they get, the energy that you get from that is like based in our sexual organs. This is like where most of the power comes from. In fact, you can see most of the world, that's why sex sells. It's such a powerful motivator for people. And such a big part of how people identify themselves, right? So it's interesting they're saying here, like, these are like God-given sex powers that we all have. Are we using this to our highest and best good? It's something that I think about frequently. Mostly in the aspect of selfishness. Like, is this a selfish thing? Because any woman, you don't even have to be drop dead gorgeous. Most women, I will say, have this ability to persuade or manipulate conversations in ways that men don't. And I feel like women, although we tends to feel maybe less powerful in a lot of ways, because we are so oppressed in many societal ways. There are still a lot of, I think that's specifically because of the sex power that women can have. And misogyny is a very real thing. So whatever our ideal, so then we look at everything on paper, we look at how we acted, and then from all of this stuff that we write down on our sex inventory, we go, okay, this is now the type of person who I do want to become. Next time I'm in this type of experience or type of relationship, I'm going to say, I am going to communicate my problems. I am going to come off more vulnerable. I am going to leave the relationship when I find out this is not the person I want to be with. This is, I am going to be more honest and transparent with my partner. I am going to be more trusting with my partner. I'm going to be more trustworthy with my next partner. Being able to really create and shape a sane sex ideal and for how we want to conduct ourselves in future relationships is really a gift of this step. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, so now we have our ideal, right? Now we've looked at all the dirty stuff that we've done, and now we've from that molded this beautiful ideal. We need to be willing to grow towards it. Okay, so we must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring still more harm in doing so. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Like, think about that. That's a very progressive thing to write in a book written in the 1940s. Like, that is extremely progressive. Like, only God can judge me, Oh, God alone, in even our sex stuff. So counsel with other persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. And this is why we have to be so tapped into our prayer and meditation, understanding that we're connecting and aligning ourselves with this higher power that is loving and forgiving and compassionate and loyal and wants us to only just be our best, healthiest, most useful selves. So only God can be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. So let's not get too emotional about it here. Just everyone's idea of what sex should be in their sex life is going to be different. It's mostly important that we understand that okay, so suppose we fall short of our chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we are going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only the half truth. It depends on us and on our motives. So, meaning if we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. I can tell you guys, I've seen this play out over and over and over again. Whenever someone gets involved with somebody, that is not because they purely care about this other person, but for their own selfish desires, including they just need a distraction, they just need somebody to talk to, they just need somebody to spend time with, they just think that they should have a relationship, or they just want someone to have sex with. It will always backfire if that is not communicated to the other person. If you're cheating in relationships, you have to really look at that, like, the way that they say, like, like if you can look at that and be like, oh my God, that was a mistake, I shouldn't have done that, and you really feel remorse about it, it's like you're less likely to drink, and of course you make amends. Although they're not even telling you that you need to go and tell the person you cheated on them, to be quite honest, but that's a whole other topic. Then it's like, okay, because now you're acknowledging to yourself that you have fallen short of your own ideal of who you wanted to be in this relationship. Whereas if you are still in the delusion that you're okay with this behavior that you have already stated that you don't want to engage in, that is where now you're splitting again. Now you are starting to act out a different story than what you internally wanted. And that is where we put ourselves in a really difficult position of dishonesty, and essentially put ourselves at a greater risk to drink or use. So, to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we might throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. Again, people get so caught up in like this like obsessing and like, oh, what about this person? Or like, oh my gosh, should they like me? Or like, why aren't they calling me? Or like, blah, blah, blah. It's like when you get that caught up in self, like you're just in self. Like you need to look outside of other people and see if you can be helpful to people. Why don't you call someone, see how they're doing, check in on someone who's not you. Again, this is otherwise just a way for us. Otherwise, we just get caught up in self again, and we're acting out of fears and delusions, etc. So if we have been thorough about our inventory, we have written down a lot. And so, yeah, that's actually where I'm gonna stop that. So just some interesting stuff to consider about sex inventory, sex ideal. I really wish I still had my sex ideal. I'm thinking about going through the steps again, and if and when I do, I might need to update that. I'm pretty sure I had like Psalms 31 woman thing in there or something, but not that it's bad. I just think it was a little corny. I think I was late on the assignment and just needed to get it done. So I hope this was helpful. And I hope that I'm sorry, I hope that this is helpful and that you found this, I don't know. Do you guys want more of this stuff? I don't know. I don't think anyone's watching this right now. Okay, I love you. Goodbye.